Now that we've talked about learning theories in educational psychology, next we're moving on to motivation, which is another area of educational psychology. So what is motivation? Motivation is anything that energizes and directs behavior. And motivation is needed because without it, nothing would happen. It is the drive behind any and all actions and behavior. The relationship between motivation and learning and performance is a reciprocal relationship. As motivation increases, more learning occurs. As more learning occurs, more motivation happens. So they build on each other, and it's a cycle. The greater the motivation, the better the performance. Just like with our learning theories, there are more than one theory of motivation. Here's a list of the theories we're going to talk about for P250. We'll talk about each of them individually in more detail. The first theory we're going to talk about is interest, and there are two kinds of interest that can motivate a person. First, there's personal interest, and then there's situational interest. Personal interest is something that a person is interested in, motivated by, because of their personality, because of their likes, their dislikes. It's ingrained in the person. Whereas situational interest is interest based on the situation. A person may not necessarily have a liking of that topic or that subject area, but by making the subject interesting or engaging, making the situation interesting, you can increase a student's motivation for that topic, subject area, assignment. The next theory is expectancy value theory. And you can think of expectancy value like your to-do list. So on a to-do list, you have things that you need to get done. If you went through and looked at it, you would have things that you expect to do or expect to do well, and things that you value or that you know need to be done for a purpose. The things that you expect to do and that you value are going to be typically the first things that you do, or the things that get checked off your to-do list. So expectancy asks, am I able to do this task? Do I expect to do well? Value asks the question, why should I do this task? Why is it important? And there are different ways to answer that value question. You can see here there are 4 types of value: attainment value, intrinsic value, utility value, and cost belief. Attainment value is that you do something in order to get something else. For example, I'm going to study for this quiz so that I get a better grade. You're not studying for the sake of studying. You're studying to attain or to get something else, in this case, a better grade. Some things have intrinsic value to a person. They like to do them. I'm going to read this book because I personally like to read. I'm interested in the subject. I'm interested in how this author writes. I like it. There's also utility value. I'm going to do this for a purpose, some kind of use for the person. And cost belief, which is choosing to do something, one task over another. So you weigh out which one is more valuable to you and your time, and you choose the one you think is more valuable. So you do a cost analysis of that task or the 2 tasks. So you ask, am I able, and what's it worth? Then that is your motivation behind engaging in a task. Goal orientation is a theory that seeks to look at what is the purpose behind the action. What is the motivation behind a person's willingness to engage in a task? And goal orientation breaks down these purposes or goal orientations into 4 categories. The first is mastery approach. The second is performance approach. Mastery avoidance and performance avoidance are the last 2. Mastery orientation is wanting to engage in a task in order to master it, in order to be the best that you can be. You're competing against yourself. Whereas performance is an orientation where you want to be the best at the time. You're competing against others. Approach and avoidance means you either approach a task or you avoid a task in order based on your motivation. So let's look at the examples on the bottom of this slide. Number 1, focus on being superior, besting others, being the smartest. That would be performance approach. If that is a person's goal, they're oriented towards being the best, not necessarily the best they can be, but being the best of that situation. And they're approaching the task in order to prove that they're superior. Number 2, use of standards of self-improvement progress. This would be mastery approach. Again, you're approaching a task in order to engage in self-improvement or to see progress. And the focus is on mastery, comparing yourself to progress, to master that task. Number 3, focus on avoiding inferiority, not looking stupid or dumb in comparison to others. That would be performance avoidance. So again, comparing to others, focus on the performance and not the task. And you're avoiding that situation so that you don't look stupid. Now, there is some debate as to whether there's actually a mastery avoidance orientation. Because if you want to master a task, you would always engage in it. But it's very rare, but some people say this would be like a professional athlete who decides to retire early or not compete in an event because they don't want to look bad compared to what they used to be. Not necessarily compared to the other people, but compared to what they used to be. So that's one you probably won't see in the classroom, but it's there in the theory. Another theory of motivation is called attribution theory, or attributions. And attributions are the reasons or the explanations a person will give for success or failure at a task. And each attribution a person gives has 3 aspects associated with it. Locus, it's either internal or external. It's either internal to the person, it's something they did, or it's external, something that someone else did or something outside of themselves did. Also, stability, whether it's stable or unstable. If the person thinks the cause of their success is stable, it's likely to happen again. Whereas if it's unstable, it might come and go. They don't know. And controllability, whether it was controllable by a person or by something, or it's uncontrollable. It's a force of nature, it's just a random act, and no one has control over it. So here are some examples of attributions a person could give. My teacher helps me when I have trouble. If someone was successful and they said this, you would say it's an external locus, it's probably stable, and it's controllable. The teacher has control over it. Whereas the second example, I didn't study long enough. If someone said this after a failure, the locus would be internal. It's internal to the person. It's stable for this purpose, but it could be unstable. It might change. And it's controllable. The person has control over how long they study. Now, You might have a different interpretation of these examples, whether it's internal or external, stable or unstable, controllable or uncontrollable. And that's part of attribution theory. It's not based on what is actually occurring, it's based on the person's perception of what happened. So a person might say, well, that quiz was too hard, it didn't cover anything we talked about in class. Well, it might, but if they hadn't done the work, then they're going to say that. Partly because of self-preservation. The idea that people will give attributions in order to preserve their thinking about themselves, usually in a positive manner. Something to note about attributions: the attribution a person gives toward a success or failure will influence their future motivation. So it doesn't necessarily influence their motivation on the current task, but when they look back and give the reason for their success or failure, it influences future motivation.